Part 57. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mocnu. Chapter 561. Yudu City is one of the main cities in the Yuzhu region. It is said that the first generation Aral king thousands of years ago, Lord Zhang Yuan, known as the Zombie King, led his troops to suppress thousands of zombie tribes here and assisted the demon lord in pacifying the apocalypse. On the bustling street, Qi Xiaoxiao was explaining the background of the city in front of Mu Qiu. People passing by on both sides were zombies with deformed or ugly faces, and only occasionally some alien figures could be seen. Compared with other towns, the number of zombies here is indeed much larger. These zombies come from different branches, including vampire nobles who look like humans, zombies with rotting faces, skeleton monsters with only skeletons left in their bodies, and mummies that are stinking. Mu Qiu and Qi Xiaoxiao strolled on the streets of the zombie clan with different styles. At this time, Mu Qiu was wearing a dark red prajna mask on his face, and his body was exuding faint fluctuations of corpse energy. The powerful fluctuations of corpse energy caused the surrounding corpse clan to retreat. Qi Xiaoxiao beside him was shocked. The corpse clan is the most sensitive to human scent. But Mu Qiu was walking majestically in the city filled with zombie clans, and the zombie clans around him couldn't see anything strange at all. Zhang Yuan. After hearing Qi Xiaoxiao's explanation, Mu Qiu recalled the infatuated man in armor in his mind. Speaking of which, Mu Qiu had promised Zhang Yuan to resurrect his zombie wife, but now Zhang Yuan's wife is still banned in Mu Qiu's shadow space. When Mu Qiu asked about Zhang Yuan's whereabouts, Qi Xiaoxiao's answer was that just like Shueqianya, Zhang Yuan disappeared without a trace shortly after unifying the corpse clan, leaving only a vague legend. This made Mu Qiu even more confused. Although Zhang Yuan was an awakened person with zombie powers, his body was already extremely strong after body mutation, and his talent was among the top among the zombie clan. Before Mu Qiu entered reincarnation, Zhang Yuan had already become a destructive level powerhouse. Under normal circumstances, zombies have extremely long lifespans, let alone Zhang Yuan who has advanced to the zombie king level. But then Zhang Yuan disappeared mysteriously like Shueqianya, which made Mu Qiu couldn't help but wonder if there was something hidden behind it. Where did these old friends go after they disappeared? The ferocious prajna mask hid Mu Qiu's expression. Qi Xiaoxiao did not notice Mu Qiu's abnormality and continued. Although the corpse clan has a long lifespan, there are also struggles between various factions. The one who leads the corpse clan now is the undead king of the vampire clan. As she said that, Qi Xiaoxiao suddenly noticed that Mu Qiu beside her stopped. She followed Mu Qiu's gaze and looked up, but what she saw was a honeycomb-shaped sky-high building in the distance. The sky was getting dark at this time, and the shell of the giant building was made of unknown materials, but it was strangely shining with blood. Human cage. Qi Xiaoxiao pursed her lips. With half-human blood in her body, she was instinctively afraid of this huge building. Having said so much, she almost forgot that they were in the center of the corpse clan at this moment. And the birdcage-like honeycomb building in front of us is the cage where humans are imprisoned, the bloody slaughterhouse where nobles enjoy themselves, the human cage. Mu Qiu had long noticed this huge building standing in the center of the city. The rich death aura floating in the sky was something that not even the zombie clan in the entire city combined could compare to. It was the deep resentment left behind by the deaths of tens of thousands of humans. Ever since Mu Qiu gained the power of the hungry ghost path, he had a strong ability to sense the death aura of these resentful spirits. Are you sure that aura is hidden in the city? Mu Qiu lowered her head and looked at the girl with animal ears. Qi Xiaoxiao touched the back of his head, wrinkled his nose, and explained with some embarrassment. It's strange. I could still feel it in this direction before, but since entering Yuzhu territory, this feeling has become intermittent. Mu Qiu nodded, said nothing, and turned her gaze to the sky-high building in the distance. If there is anything suspicious about the entire city, it is only the slaughterhouse filled with death and resentment. The bustling corpse tribe is constantly flowing on the streets, and occasionally you can see some skeleton monsters wearing brocade clothes. After thousands of years of evolution, some upper-level zombies have possessed extraordinary intelligence like humans, while only the common lower-level zombies still retain their slowness and clumsiness. From time to time, you can still hear some hoarse voices shouting, but the goods sold are not ordinary food, but pieces of flesh and blood cut from fresh human bodies. Standing on a towering attic somewhere, Yefanyan looked at everything below, frowning. Although she had already expected it, the situation of human beings in this world was more dangerous than she imagined. Oh, I never thought that our invincible Lord the Holy Sun would be so sentimental. A strange voice came from behind, and a man with curly hair was staring at Yefanyan's back with a hint of ridicule in his tone. "White pigeon, don't be rude to the Holy Sun." The companion beside him quickly yelled, but this only made the curly-haired man even more angry, and said with a sinister smile, "How dare I provoke the Holy Sun? In just a few months, I gained the favor of the clan leader and became the new generation of Holy Sun of our human race. Now, with one order, she has summoned all of us scattered fires to carry out the mission with her. She is so impressive." The man called by Ge had a bit of anger in his eyes. If it weren't for Yefanyan's sudden appearance a few months ago, the next generation of the human race's Holy Sun should belong to him. With the Holy Sun coming in front and the Blood Demon coming in the back, the future of our human race is really bright. Bai Ge's teasing voice was not concealed at all, and it went straight into Yefanyan's ears, but Yefanyan replied without changing his face. "If you think the lives of those fellows below are not worth mentioning, you can continue talking." Black lines appeared on Bai Ge's forehead, and he dared not speak any more. He dared not touch such a rebellious field. Holy Sun. At this moment, a human man walked up to the attic and said to Yefanyan, "The aliens belonging to our fire in the two surrounding areas have gathered and are waiting for orders at any time. The Holy Sun mentioned by this group of humans is Yefanyan. After coming to this world, Yefanyan used the holy sword in her hand to save several villages that were slaughtered by aliens. Her powerful talent soon attracted the attention of the human ancestral land. After being valued, she was promoted to the Holy Sun of the human race, the inheritor of the next generation of human fire." Yefanyan nodded and looked up at the towering building standing in front of her. Under the dark clouds, it seemed like a peerless beast with its ferocious fangs. She turned around and a group of humans had gathered behind her. These humans were dressed in different clothes, and all wore masks with various patterns on their heads. Looking closely, they looked like flames rising. They are human beings from all continents, and they have come to help after receiving the message from the Son of God. The mask on their faces is not only to conceal their identities, but also to prepare for escaping from here later. Yefanyan also holds a fire mask in her hand, and speaks to the human beings in front of her. "Our goal this time is to destroy the human cage and rescue the human companions imprisoned in it. It is very likely that we will encounter Lord-level or higher beings in this mission. I hope everyone will be ready to evacuate at any time." As she spoke, Yefanyan had already put on the mask that symbolized the rising fire, turned around and looked at the human prison behind her that looked like a honeycomb, and the jade pendant around her neck emitted a faint light. Then now, the action begins. Yefanyan soared into the air, the jade pendant shone brightly, and a dazzling golden lightsaber appeared in her hand. The gorgeous golden light gradually dyed her black hair into gold, and the holy light lit up the dark night sky at this moment. At the same time, the attic behind him shattered, and countless masked figures emerged one after another. Holding various strange magic weapons in their hands, they flashed strange lights in the night sky and shouted and followed closely. Their goal was the huge building in front of them that was tens of meters high. So far, a long dormant war between the human race and the zombie race is about to start tonight. Sign in at the end of the world, Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 562. Inside the human cage, the corpses were roaring, and a unique feast of the corpse clan was unfolding at this moment. Many nobles in gorgeous clothes surrounded the stands, looking at the fierce battle below with a playful look on their faces. And the people fighting on the platform at this moment were hundreds of scarred human aliens. As the highest level place to raise human meat, the human cage is very picky about the choice of humans. They will capture human aliens with magic power all over the region. In order to ensure the freshness and firmness of the meat, they will also hold such duels between human aliens from time to time. Like raising a goo, hundreds of people were thrown into a platform, fighting with bare hands, struggling, and only one person could survive in the end. The survivors could survive to the next round of fighting by chance, and the remaining dead bodies would be eaten by these corpse clans on the spot. The corpse clans looked at the increasingly fierce battle below, and cheered excitedly. Every human on the platform had red eyes and blood all over their bodies. They fought and bit their companions like crazy. In order to survive, they had no other choice. Until the end, there was only one figure left standing on the field. This human man was already covered with wounds and there was almost no intact flesh on his body. Under his feet were the broken limbs of his companions. There was a cheer from all around, but there was no joy on the man's face. He looked at the darkness above his head with a dull face. Even if he survived today by chance, he might still die at the hands of his companions tomorrow. There was no hope at all. Soon, the numb-faced man was taken down by the prison guards and entered a small room that looked like a honeycomb. Rooms like this can be seen everywhere in the human cage. The prison guards present began to clean up the remains on the ground. After a short special treatment, these corpses will be sent to the tables of these corpses and become unique delicacies. Just as countless corpses were reveling, a loud noise suddenly reached their ears. At first, the sound was very weak, but it became more and more intense, attracting the attention of all the corpses. Boom! The sound of the bombardment came along the wall, and a fierce cannon blasted through the wall and penetrated the whole place. Large pieces of rocks rolled down, and even the ground was shaking, shocking all the corpses present. Then, countless human figures wearing fire masks entered along the broken wall, holding various strange magic weapons and fighting fiercely with the corpses in the cage. Those corpses who were still tasting the delicious food did not expect to be attacked here, and fell into panic in an instant. Even the ground under their feet was blown up, and another group of fire aliens suddenly attacked and slaughtered the surrounding zombie monsters. A hole was blasted into the thick wall, and the cannon on the right arm of a huge azure mecha was still burning with flames that had not yet dissipated. Suddenly, a red light flashed on the chest of the mecha, and the huge mecha disintegrated in the next moment, turning into granular flames and dissipating. Hunglian's figure fell from the mecha, her chest heaving violently, her face pale, and her forehead covered with fine beads of sweat. "Sister!" The red-haired boy Au hurried to Hunglian's side, extremely worried about her sister's physical condition. "I'm fine." With the help of Au, Honglian stood up with difficulty, looking at the stone plate emitting colorful light in her hand with a complicated expression. With her current strength, it is still difficult to fully control this powerful red magic weapon, and the consumption of supporting a few breaths has reached her limit. Inside the human cage on the other side, thousands of human aliens belonging to the fire have begun to wreak havoc. They rushed into the honeycomb-like cages, opened the shackles of the cages, and released the humans trapped in them. After a brief excitement, these long-held grudges took revenge on everything around them with ferocious faces. Many nobles who were still feasting had not yet reacted to what happened, and their heads were pinched off. Until then, the prison guards in the human cages finally received the alarm and called for external assistance while resisting the attacks of humans. For a time, the entire human cage was in chaos, with the shouts and bites of various zombies and humans. More and more prison guards arrived and joined forces to suppress those humans who tried to escape. These imprisoned humans are all aliens with magic power. After joining the battle, they vented their resentment on many zombies. From the scene alone, the human side actually had a short-term advantage. But this is only the appearance of everything after all, and the more intense battle has just begun. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 563. In Yuzhu, in the holy feast human cage worshipped by the Corpse clan, an extremely tragic battle between humans and corpses was going on fiercely. Today was a great festival for many corpse clans to hold a feast, but this group of masked figures suddenly broke in and launched a crazy offensive against many corpse clans at the banquet. After a brief shock, many corpse clans sitting at the banquet also began to counterattack those masked figures holding magic weapons. These corpse clans are not only nobles among the corpses, but also elites among the alien races. With their own racial talents, their strength is quite extraordinary. After just a moment of fighting, the advantage of the human race's surprise attack disappeared, and the situation on the scene became balanced again. In addition, the prison guards in the human cages also came in continuously at this time, and the human race suddenly fell into a passive situation. In a critical situation, the human race wearing fire masks changed their strategy and aimed their attack at the honeycomb-like cages on the wall. With a series of loud noises, huge holes were blasted out on the wall, and the human aliens imprisoned in them escaped and joined the battle below. Puff. A human wearing a fire mask spit out a large amount of blood from his mouth and flew out. What is terrifying is that the blood spit out by this human is actually pitch black. The man's legs were festering and purple, and the corpse poison spread to his whole body along the wounds on his legs. In front of him, a zombie with rotten flesh slowly walked over, his eyes rolled back, but his arms were as narrow and long as willow branches, with black and purple tips, and drops of corpse poison turned into liquid and dripped down his arms. At the feet of this zombie, there were already corpses of fire humans lying down. These people were also corroded and festering by corpse poison, and some had already corroded into piles of bones. Are they humans? The white eyeballs rolled, and the zombie made a hoarse voice, which had confirmed the true identity of everyone under the mask. This zombie is the top powerhouse of the zombie clan, and has a keen ability to distinguish humans. The man who fell to the ground with vomiting blood supported himself with his hands and retreated repeatedly. But the deformed zombie had no intention of letting him go. The corpse poison dripped all over his body, and his mouth was stretched to an arc that ordinary people could not imagine, and he was actually going to swallow the man in one gulp. The pupils under the mask flashed with panic, and the man hurriedly took out several eyeball-sized compressed magic crystals from his waist and threw them in front of him. The deformed zombie swung his arms calmly, and the compressed magic crystals were all bounced off by it. The magic crystals exploded after hitting the surrounding walls, and blew several holes in the walls. The power was so great that it was moving. The zombie was about to enjoy this fresh delicacy in front of him, but suddenly a gust of wind blew in his ears. Swish! The zombie actually grew a willow-like tentacle behind it, grabbing the thing that attacked it. The neck twisted back 180 degrees, and it was actually a human head that attacked it from behind. In a cage beside it, the wall of the cage was blown open by the magic crystal, leaving a huge hole several meters high. A tall figure emerged from the smoke. When the deformed zombie saw this figure, his eyes turned and his tongue spit out. The second-level wanted criminal in Yuzhu, the blood-killing slave. The tall figure walked out of it, and it turned out to be a muscular man with a gnarled body. What was terrifying was that the man had a grim smile on his face, and he kept swallowing something in his mouth, with a little blood stain at the corner of his mouth. As he looked over, he was holding a human arm in his hand. Cannibalism. In this cruel human cage, the so-called human nature has long been distorted, and some humans even eat their companions in order to survive. It's a human slave, stop him quickly, he is the food that Lord Owl King has reserved. The prison guards who were still fighting with human aliens around them quickly put down their fight with the fire and turned to attack the muscular man. The strong man who can be called a human slave waved his hand and crushed the heads of several prison guards who rushed over. The strong man's body burst into surging magic energy fluctuations, and he even reached the level of a demon general. Similar plots happened in the human cage at this moment. The humans who survived the heavy fighting in the human cage were all ferocious and evil. At this time, they came out of the cages, and their twisted and violent hearts prompted them to frantically slaughter all the creatures around them, just wanting to escape from this human purgatory as soon as possible. The architectural structure of the human cage is like a huge beehive, and the dense honeycombs imprisoned humans who were used as food. The higher the cage is, the stronger the human beings are. There are no less than 10 demon generals like the muscular man. At the same time, at the top of the human cage, Yefanyan was leading several human beings who came out of the ancestral land to break through the heavy defense and rush to the deepest part of the human cage. Now Yefanyan's temperament is not only much more stable, but the energy in his body is about to break through the peak of the S-level realm and reach the destruction level under the nourishment of the Holy Sword and Jade Pendant. Such strength is enough to become a lord guarding one side even if it is placed in the various domains of eternal night. Yefanyan stretched out his jade hand, and a series of invisible sharp wind blades shot out, and the prison guards who blocked him fell to the ground one after another. At this moment, a huge force came from the top of his head, and Yefanyan's expression changed, and he quickly dodged and retreated. Careful! The next second, the ground where Yefanyan was standing was instantly collapsed by a huge force, and his companions behind him stopped when they saw this. Everyone took a closer look, and what was blocking them was a burly zombie holding a mace, wearing armor, but with a head that looked like a ferocious porcupine. Yes, it is Lord level. Everyone screamed in surprise. Although they had expected it, they didn't expect the Lord level existence to arrive so quickly. I wonder who is so brave and dares to break into the human cage. It turns out they are a few tinder ants. The pig-headed zombie carries a several-foot-long mace on its shoulders, has a rough voice, and its protruding fangs look particularly ferocious. Just in time, let's present some top-notch ingredients to Mr. Xiao Wang. A cold light flashed in the eyes of the pig-headed zombie, and he directly waved the giant mace in his hand to attack Yefanyan and others. The huge force of gravity on the mace made everyone dare not touch its edge, and they quickly retreated backwards. Although these humans are also human elites who came out of their ancestral land, they are only level 9 demon generals at the highest level, and are far from being a match for this pig-headed zombie. However, the prison guards behind him also came after hearing the news and launched a siege on several fire humans without hesitation. In an instant, several humans had died tragically under the siege of pig-headed zombies and numerous prison guards. Yefanyan's expression also became solemn at this moment. If this stalemate continues, it will only attract more and more reinforcements from the enemy. At this thought, Yefanyan closed his eyes and stood in the sky. His jade hand reached out and grasped the dark green jade pendant around his neck. In an instant, the jade pendant glowed with golden light, and a magnificent pattern floated out on the surface of the jade pendant. Golden light particles gathered together to form a long and narrow golden sword in front of Yefanyan. The holy golden light dyed his long hair into a golden color. Shua! The next moment, Yefanyan suddenly opened his eyes, with a touch of gold in his clear pupils, and reached out to grasp the phantom of the long sword that appeared in front of him from the golden light in the sky. The dazzling golden light illuminated the heaven and earth, immediately attracting the attention of everyone below. Then, what is that? The lord-level pig-headed zombie's eyes were shocked. He actually felt a fatal threat from that beam of golden light. I saw Yefanyan holding the holy sword high, with a look of indifference in his golden eyes, like a god looking down at the world. And the fluctuations of magic energy emanating from Yefanyan's body were also rising at this time, directly entering the realm of destruction. Under many shocked eyes, Yefanyan stood in the sky, holding the holy sword high. Countless golden rays condensed along the several-foot-long sword body and slashed towards the pig-headed zombie below. The pig-headed zombie suddenly felt that he was locked by an irresistible fatal murderous intention, and his body was so stiff that he could not move. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 564. At the critical moment, he grinned and bit his tongue, waving his arms and holding the mace in front of him. At this moment, the golden lightsaber in mid-air that looked like a divine punishment was already pressing down. Crack! In just an instant, the pig-headed zombie's proud mace weapon broke. The golden light struck the thick armor, piercing the chest of the pig-headed zombie and breaking its bones. The latter also vomited blood and flew out. This single blow actually seriously injured a Lord-level pig-headed zombie. This scene stunned everyone, including the humans who came out of the ancestral land. They never thought that Yefanyan was so powerful. The curly-haired man by GE looked at the golden holy sword in Yefanyan's hand in disbelief. What level of magic weapon is that? It can actually penetrate the Lord's body with one blow. In mid-air, the golden holy sword in Yefanyan's hand turned into particles and dissipated after a blow, and the golden light radiating around Yefanyan gradually dimmed. Cold sweat was soaked on her snow-white forehead, her face was pale, and her chest was heaving violently. It was obvious that this blow took a lot of energy from her. She fell to the ground, ignoring the seriously injured and struggling pig-headed zombie in the distance, and ran towards the depths of the cage. At the top of the human cage is an extremely thick stone door with strange patterns engraved on it. Old blood stains can also be seen through the gaps in the stone door. Yefanyan stood in front of the stone door and stretched out his hand. The strong wind swept around him, and the strong wind bombarded the stone door with terrifying air pressure. In an instant, the thick stone door was shattered instantly, and a weak light shone into the deep cage. I saw a cross several meters high placed in the depths of the prison. Tied to the cross was the figure of a man covered in scars and disheveled hair. The man looked extremely miserable. His whole body was bound by thick iron chains, and his limbs and wrists were covered with blood scabs. The flesh and blood on the chest was forcibly dug away, revealing the stark white bones. There was blood dripping all over the body, and there was no good piece of meat in sight. Yefanyan walked quickly in front of the man. The man sensed something and slowly raised his head. Seeing Yefanyan's face, a look of horror appeared in his eyes. "Fanyan, why is it you?" Looking at the man's miserable appearance, Yefanyan frowned and said, "It's too late to explain, get out of here first." However, the iron chains on the man's body are made of special magic crystals, which have the effect of suppressing magic energy. It is difficult for ordinary weapons to break them. Seeing this, Yefanyan drew out the long knife on the side and cut off the man's limbs without any explanation. The severe pain caused the man to take a few breaths of cold air with a ferocious look on his face. Hiss! The man who was chopped into a pig looked at Yefanyan sadly and said, "Sister, you are so cruel to your brother." After the words fell, the man's severed hands and feet actually squirmed slowly towards the broken limbs. As the limbs fit together, the broken flesh and blood healed quickly at a speed visible to the naked eye. The man's head was spinning, and he was moving his limbs that had been restrained for a long time and had become somewhat numb. There was an angry look in his eyes. "Grandma, you're such a bear. I have to demolish this damn place today." As soon as he finished speaking, a group of prison guards behind him chased in. When they saw that the man detained deep in the prison had been rescued, they exclaimed, "Hurry and report to Lord Owl, the first-level wanted criminal who was imprisoned deep in the human cage has escaped. A flash of anger appeared in the man's eyes. He held the iron knife beside him with both hands, and his arm suddenly turned into a sharp knife. Immediately afterwards, the man's arm stretched tens of meters like rubber, and the long knife on the arm blade instantly chopped off the heads of more than a dozen prison guards. "Your grandma is a bitch, please remember my name is Yeshinwei. Quickly, our people can't hold on much longer." Yefanyan ignored her brother playing tricks and quickly urged Yeshinwei to evacuate. The two of them rushed out of the prison and ran straight to the bottom of the cage. The Corpse Clan prison guards they encountered all turned into dead souls under Yeshinwei's sword. During this period, Yeshinwei's injuries were slowly healing. However, at this moment, an extremely terrifying pressure of magic energy suddenly came from the dome of the human cage. Yefanyan seemed to feel something, raised his head and said, "Not good, Tianlai Novel Network." The top of the human cage, which was tens of meters high, suddenly opened wide. Scarlet blood spread along the sky toward the human cage. A cloud of blood mist descended from the dome, and the blood in the entire human cage became restless. "How could I just let you leave? My ingredients." A spine-tingling sinister laughter suddenly echoed in the sky. Everyone who was still fighting felt that the blood in their bodies began to flow back involuntarily, and their bodies trembled. Many zombie clansmen in the human cage began to worship respectfully. "Welcome to the Lord Xiaowang. A real Owl King has arrived." At the same time, at the broken door wall of the human cage, two figures, one tall and one short, stared at this hive-like sky-high building. "The breath of reincarnation you just sensed is here." Muqiu lowered her head and looked at the girl with animal ears next to her. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 565. Everyone looked up and saw a bloody figure slowly descending from the dome. It was a mysterious man wearing a bloody cloak, with wavy yellow hair and a noble temperament, but his face was pale, with only a thin lip as red as blood. "Welcome to the Lord Owl King." The prison guards and many corpses in the human cage stopped the battle in front of them and bowed to the figure in the sky. At this time, everyone also knew the true identity of the figure that suddenly descended. Yes, it's the undead Owl King. The contemporary night owl who suppresses the Yuzhu region. Oh no, hurry up. This is a real Owl King level strongman. At this moment, everyone began to evacuate to the exit of the human cage in a panic. The Owl King level strongman is far beyond their ability to contend with. Even the usually unruly Yeshinwei became more serious at this moment, protecting Yefanyan behind him and saying, "Fanyan, you leave here first, I will fight this bastard." "Leave." The bloody figure in the sky suddenly laughed out loud, licked his scarlet lips, looked at the fleeing crowd below, and said with a sinister smile, "How can you easily let go of the delicious food that is delivered to your door?" After the voice fell, he suddenly spread his hands and raised his head, and the blood mist in the sky scattered around him. In an instant, the whole human cage was filled with scarlet blood mist, and the human who was still running suddenly found that the blood in his body was flowing back uncontrollably, and even his body was stiff in place. When the blood mist covered the wall of the human cage, it actually condensed like ice, as if it was a blood scab that wrapped the whole human cage. In an instant, the cage turned bloody and dark, with only a faint light shining from the dome above the head of the man in the blood-red cloak. "So now." The pale-faced nobleman licked his finger, the ring on his index finger shone brightly, and a blood-red spear appeared in his hand. He looked at Yeshinwei and Yefanyan, with a little greed in his eyes. "It's finally time to taste the fruits of our labor." On the other side, Muqiu and Qi Xiaoxiao had just entered the cage, and a thick blood mist was floating in the huge slaughterhouse. "Oh!" Muqiu seemed to have sensed something, and looked up at the dome in the sky. At this moment, the diffuse blood mist turned into blood scabs that wrapped around the wall, and if you looked closely, you could see blood streaks floating on the surface of the wall. At this moment, the human cage seemed to have become the internal organs of some creatures, and all the creatures inside were undigested food. A large number of humans fled from the depths of the cage in the distance. There were human aliens imprisoned in the cage, and there were also humans belonging to the fire seed. These humans passed by Miu with panic. At this point, they could only try their best to escape from here, because there was a real owl king above them. How could it be? When they arrived at the exit of the human cage, they were surprised to find that the entire wall was covered with blood scabs, and they were trapped inside the cage. Everyone tried their best to beat the wall frantically to try to break a way out, but it was useless. At the same time, the pursuers behind them also came in an endless stream, and many prison guards launched a siege against the fleeing humans. The Owl King has ordered that all humans in the human cage must be left behind, regardless of life or death. In a moment, the surrounding human race suffered heavy casualties and endless cries of grief. Tianlai Novel Network. Miu looked down at Qi Xiaoxiao beside him. Is the breath you just sensed here? Qi Xiaoxiao sniffed with the tip of her nose, and the thick blood around her made her cough repeatedly. It's so strange, I just sensed it was here, but it suddenly disappeared. Did it suddenly disappear? Miu stroked his chin and looked at the dome above his head. There, an extraordinary energy fluctuation was brewing. Stop! A series of low roars suddenly came from behind him. Miu stopped and turned his head. Behind him were dozens of prison guards who rushed over, holding magic weapons and aiming at Miu in front. They had just killed several humans who tried to escape, and when they came to their senses, there was actually a slippery fish in front of them. When they saw the crimson mask on Miu's face, these prison guards looked at each other. Mask? It's a human of the fire seed. These prison guards mistook Miu for the fire seed humans who raided the human cage. They immediately launched an attack on Miu, and countless sharp magic soldiers stabbed at Miu's body. But suddenly, they were surprised to find that they seemed to be imprisoned by something, and their bodies were frozen in place. A prison guard subconsciously looked down and found that a large sea of blood was surging under him, and bloody hands stretched out from the blood and tightly wrapped around his body. His companions were also entangled by the bloody hands stretched out from the blood sea, struggling to be dragged into the endless sea of blood. The beast-eared girl next to him glanced at it, and tiptoed forward to collect the magic soldiers dropped by the prison guards. Miu turned around, his eyes calm, feeling the energy fluctuations from the depths of the human cage, and the dark purple box on his chest suddenly glowed with blood. Are you getting excited too? The demon box was like a hungry beast, eager to express its emotions to Miu and devour the unparalleled delicacy in front of it. Blood, like souls, has a fatal attraction for the monster box. Then let me see what kind of delicious food is hidden there. Deep in the human cage, Yeshinwei's body flew out and hit the wall behind, which was covered in blood scab, and a large hole was immediately opened in the latter. Strangely, the blood stains on the wall seemed to be alive, turning into bloodshot stains and slowly healing. A trace of blood spilled from the corner of Yeshinwei's mouth, and the unhealed injuries on his body collapsed again. In front of him, the immortal king wearing a blood-red cloak was elegant and had an intoxicating smile on his face. The aroma of delicious food, how fragrant! Yeshinwei stood up staggeringly. His body had not recovered from the rounds of torture, and he, who was already exhausted, was no longer a match for the immortal king. The immortal king slowly walked towards the two of them. Logically speaking, I should save a top-notch treasure like yours for last. As the guardian of a base in the apocalypse, Yeshinwei's strength has reached a rare level of destruction. In this era, ordinary lords are no match for it, and even at its peak, it is not impossible to fight against the King of Owls. But the immortal king suddenly looked at Yefanyan, who was not far away, and a strange color flashed in his pupils. I seem to have discovered more wonderful ingredients. Human, the aura that remains on your body, really disgusts and fascinates me. Click, click. Your grandma is a bear. I have never been looked down upon like this. Yeshinwei stood up, there was a crisp sound of bones twisting on his body, and he looked at the immortal Owl King with a fierce look in his eyes. He looked at the corpses on the ground beside him. These were all corpses killed in the battle. I didn't want to be contaminated with these disgusting things. As he spoke, Yeshinwei's limbs began to turn into a pool of sticky flesh and blood, and continued to spread outward. When these flesh and blood touched the corpses on the ground, those mutilated corpses began to fester, and were finally assimilated into sticky flesh and blood. Countless flesh and blood continuously gathered on Yeshinwei's body, and Yeshinwei's body also continued to expand, and finally transformed into a huge flesh and blood giant. That's it, that's it. Seeing that the flesh and blood giant transformed by Yeshinwei was about to burst the wall, the eyes of the immortal Owl King became more and more excited. A sickly blush appeared on his pale face, and he looked like he was crazy and said, "This perfect body, pure flesh and blood, and that unparalleled alluring taste. This is why I regard you as a treasure." The immortal Owl King opened his bloody mouth, and thirsty saliva was already flowing from the corners of his mouth. The blood turned into wings behind him, and he raised his spear and rushed towards the flesh and blood giant transformed by Yeshinwei. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 566. I can't wait any longer, now, I'm going to eat you now. Opening his bloody mouth, his eyes filled with scarlet blood, the undead king raised his spear and rushed towards the flesh and blood giant. Yeshinwei, who had devoured hundreds of dead souls, also fell into madness at this moment, letting out a weird roar. Full of resentment, he intended to tear apart everything in sight, and his deformed hands grabbed the undead Owl King that was speeding towards him. I saw several meters long thick hands grabbing the body of the immortal Owl King, and with great force, it smashed heavily into the ground. But in an instant, the body of the immortal Owl King was crushed to pieces, turning into rising blood and dispersing, and transformed into a head with an intoxicated look. It's this smell, it's really a rare treasure in the world. The next second, the body of the undead Owl King had regrouped. He raised the spear in his hand and stabbed it out fiercely. The flesh monster's deformed arm actually broke instantly. Roar. As the severed arm fell, the flesh and blood giant roared from its mouth, and another arm regenerated from the severed limb, and spikes sprouted from the body. This time, it used both hands and feet to rush towards the undead Owl King. The body of the immortal Owl King turned into blood mist and dissipated again, but this time it appeared behind the flesh and blood giant. I saw him waving his arms, and the bloody spear in his hand penetrated the body of the flesh and blood giant, directly nailing it to the far wall. Immediately afterwards, the undead Owl King pulled out his spear, and with a crazy look on his face, he stabbed bloody holes into the body of the flesh and blood giant one after another. The flesh giant's healing speed could not keep up with the speed of the undead Owl King's heavy damage. In an instant, the chest of the flesh and blood giant had turned into a puddle of minced meat. Only the blood threads inside were still intertwined and slowly healing. The demon soldiers in the hands of the undead king seemed to have a natural restraint effect on the flesh and blood monsters transformed by Yeshinwei, and they were seriously injured within a moment of the fight. But the immortal king had no intention of stopping, and penetrated the flesh and blood giant's body over and over again with a ferocious expression. Good ingredients must be tempered over time. Everyone knows that the immortal Owl King is not only the most powerful among the Owl Kings, but also shows his crazy side when it comes to food. The flesh and blood giant beneath him shrank even more under the constant blows from the undead Owl King, and finally transformed into the form of Yeshinwei again. Yeshinwei's body had suffered heavy injuries long before. At this moment, he had lost half of his strength in the battle with the undead king, and was easily crushed by the undead king. Yeshinwei. Yefanyan stood up with a pale face. The blow that severely damaged the Lord had consumed most of her energy. It was extremely difficult to summon the Holy Sword at this moment. But the current situation was critical, and she couldn't care less about the possible backlash caused by forcing her body to overload. I saw her holding the jade pendant on her chest tightly, and with the thought, the jade pendant suddenly glowed with golden light. However, what was different from before was that this golden light flickered on and off, looking extremely unstable. The shadow of a long sword exuding the golden light of the holy sword gathered in front of Yefanyan. She bit her lower lip tightly, took the holy sword and slashed towards the body of the immortal Owl King. In an instant, the sharp sword energy carried the holy golden light and passed through the wind. Even the blood scabs on the surrounding walls quickly rotted and collapsed after being contaminated by the golden light. Feeling the murderous intent coming from behind him, the immortal king directly waved his blood-colored spear in front of him. When the golden sword energy bombarded the bloody spear, it made a noisy sound like ice cubes falling into boiling water. The golden light dissipated, and a large hole appeared in the immortal king's gun that could not be repaired. And a bloody wound appeared on his chest, which could not be healed no matter how much blood poured in. The immortal king's expression looked a little stunned, his eyes widened, and he subconsciously touched the wound on his chest. The bright red blood on his fingertips was so real. He stuck out his tongue and touched the blood on the wound. The feeling in his mouth was so hot and hot. "It's true, you are the ingredient of my dreams." The immortal king looked at Yefanyan, his mouth wide open to reveal a pair of fangs, and blood suddenly surged around his body, making him majestic. Until this moment, the undead Owl King finally showed his fangs, and countless corpse tribes below felt the terrifying pressure coming from their blood and trembled. In a dark corner not far away, Qi Xiaoxiao fainted directly, not knowing whether he was frightened by this terrifying pressure or something. But Mu Qiu was completely unaffected. She didn't even look at the immortal king. She looked at the blonde woman opposite the immortal king with a look of shock. "Yefanyan, why is she here?" Mu Qiu remembered that during the battle at the beast nest, the door to reincarnation that brought her to this era was originally opened by Yefanyan and Su Wen. To be precise. Mu Qiu looked at the jade pendant on Yefanyan's chest that exuded the power of heaven. Perhaps, he can find clues about the gate of reincarnation from this jade pendant. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 567. The immortal king roared and laughed excitedly. His claws became extremely sharp and he was about to attack Yefanyan. Puff. But suddenly, the body of the immortal king stagnated, and a large pool of blood spurted out from his chest. He slowly turned his head, only to find that a big hole had been opened in his chest by an iron-colored arm. The iron-like arm shone with a cold light, and coupled with the wound injured by Yefanyan just now, the arm easily penetrated his chest. A trace of blood spilled from the corner of the immortal king's mouth, and he slowly turned his head. Suddenly, he discovered that Yeshinwei, who was lying down behind him, stood up at some point and stretched out an arm to instantly penetrate his body. "Our battle is not over yet." He stood up staggeringly and looked at the immortal Owl King with a grin on his face. At this time, Yeshinwei's whole body was filled with a strange metallic luster. If he looked carefully, the flesh and blood on his body was actually embedded with shining crystal nuclei. The immortal king seemed to realize something, and suddenly looked at the surrounding prisons. Originally, all the corpses on the ground had been completely fused by Yeshinwei, but now even the demon soldiers scattered in the prison have disappeared without a trace. Instead, Yeshinwei's body was covered with layers of metal, as if a set of armor had been constructed for him. This human man actually integrated all the surrounding demon soldiers into his body. The corners of Yeshinwei's mouth grinned in a strange arc, but veins popped out on his forehead and his eyes turned white. This was his first time to fuse weapons of this era. After forcibly merging with these magic soldiers, magic energy of various properties began to rage in his body, and his body also underwent some kind of mutation. Now he not only has to bear the explosive pain caused by the fusion of magic energy, but also has to hold on to maintain his sanity, and his body is about to collapse. But there is no doubt about the powerful power brought by this form. Yeshinwei now feels that his whole body is filled with powerful power brought by magic energy, and the injuries in his body are also repairing quickly. The fish on the chopping board is also looking for death. The immortal king's face turned extremely gloomy. He had not suffered such a serious injury for a long time. With a murderous intent in his eyes, he waved the bloody spear in his hand and pierced Yeshinwei's head. He has no interest in wasting time here. However, when the bloody spear hit Yeshinwei's body, there was a sound of gold and iron clashing. At this level, it's still very early. Yeshinwei laughed wildly, and now most of his body has been fused and replaced by countless magic soldiers. I saw his figure surge forward wildly, and his whole body turned into sharp magic weapons, launching a fierce attack on the undead king. For a moment, the figures of the two people moved around the entire human cage one after another, and the damage caused during the battle was astonishing. All the surrounding creatures affected by the battle died tragically on the spot, and the building structure of the human cage began to collapse layer by layer. Even the blood scabs covering the walls were cut into big holes, and countless humans took this opportunity to flee. Yeshinwei roared, and his arm was instantly thrown several meters away, turning into a sharp arm blade and cutting the body of the undead Owl King in half. Shua! The body of the undead Owl King exploded into blood mist and dissipated, then drifted away to reassemble in the distance. It seems that I underestimate you. The immortal Owl King's pale face was covered with a haze. The food in his eyes actually hurt him at this time, which really made him quite annoyed. But that's about it. I saw the immortal king stretched out one hand, and a surge of blood suddenly surged around his body. The pressure of the king of owls spread out, and the sky above the human cage was instantly covered by blood mist. Yeshinwei suddenly felt that the blood in his body began to flow back uncontrollably, flowing out through the gaps in the demon soldier's armor, turning into balls of blood flying up. The scattered blood flowed along the arm of the undead Owl King and was sucked by him. The wounds in the undead Owl King's body healed quickly. He looked up and said intoxicatedly, "Perfect, this perfect fragrance." Licking his scarlet lips, the immortal king showed excitement, and the next moment he appeared behind Yeshinwei. "Sure enough, you are the most delicious food." The blood in his body continued to flow uncontrollably, and Yeshinwei suddenly felt dizzy, and his body, which was already on the verge of losing control, collapsed. Controlling blood at will and sucking the blood of others to replenish oneself, this is the real reason why the immortal Owl King has endured for a long time and stands at the top of the Owl King. The fused demon soldier armors disintegrated one after another, exposing the shriveled flesh and blood inside, and the undead Owl King's attacks followed one after another. From this moment on, the situation between the two sides reversed again. In a moment, Yeshinwei's flesh and blood body had been penetrated by the undead king in turn, and he flew out with his eyes turned white. The powerful attack caused the internal frame of the human cage to collapse. As the blood mist filled the air, the figure of the undead Owl King appeared above the bottom platform of the human cage. Countless eyes looked at the bloody figure floating in mid-air in horror, and their hearts were shocked. This is the true strength of an Owl King. I almost forgot today's staple food. The immortal king smiled sinisterly and looked at Yefanyan in the distance. The latter subconsciously clenched the jade pendant on his chest with a solemn expression. But suddenly, as if sensing something, the undead Owl King suddenly looked towards a place in the blood mist. There was a figure walking out there, wearing a crimson prajna mask on his face. The slender figure stood upright, his steps were neither fast nor slow, as if he was not affected by the blood mist at all. When he saw the mask worn by this figure, Yefanyan's expression suddenly became shocked. His pupils trembled, staring at the figure that appeared in the blood mist. No, how could this be possible? Muqiu walked out of the blood mist, looked at the undead owl king floating in the air, raised his palm, and a misty gate emerged. But strangely, this gate did not react at all, and the misty clouds turned into python dragon chains wrapped around the gate. It seems that you are not the existence I am looking for. Seeing that the gate of reincarnation did not react, Muqiu slowly shook his head, which meant that the power of the six paths he was looking for was not here. It just so happened that Qi Xiaoxiao had fainted at this time, so Muqiu could only look for some clues from the undead owl king. Human, you give me a strange feeling. The undead owl king's eyes changed, and with a wave of his hand, countless blood condensed into needles all over the sky and shot out in the direction of Muqiu. Muqiu stood there, motionless, and the blood-like needles shot in front of him were instantly dispersed by an invisible force. A strange blood light flashed on his chest, and the dark purple box kept trembling with excitement. Oh! Seeing that the masked man in front of him easily blocked his attack, the undead owl king suddenly recalled the recent rumors. Are you the blood demon who killed the lord of the northern desert? Then he laughed crazily. Interesting, I can foresee that you must taste delicious. Like a gourmet who pursues perfection, he maintains an almost paranoid enthusiasm for every unknown ingredient. In the next second, the undead owl king in a red cape had already pounced on Muqiu on the ground with red eyes. The red figure flashed in the air, and the endless blood mist was stirred up. The undead owl king's sharp teeth had opened, intending to taste this unique delicacy. Suddenly, a pair of thin bloody hands stretched out from the ground in front of Muqiu, and wrapped around the body of the undead owl king, and for a while his body could not move an inch. Half a step to the source of the Tao. Muqiu raised his head and looked directly into the eyes of the undead owl king. Based on the battle just now, Muqiu had deduced that the strength of the owl king in front of him was similar to Su Wen in the beast's nest. They were both at the peak of the destruction level, and they only needed an opportunity to advance to the realm of the source of the Tao. The indifferent look under the mask made the undead owl king extremely annoyed. The food in his eyes actually looked at him with such contempt. Just a blood-eating weapon. The undead owl king's eyes were red with anger, and he used his blood-colored spear to cut off the bloody hand wrapped around his body with one hand, and rushed towards Muqiu to kill him. Oh! A blood-sucking magic soldier. I happen to have one too. In an instant, the blood mist on the spear in the undead owl king's hand gathered, as if it had turned into a blood-colored tornado, and the spiral spear smashed straight into the ground. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 568. Instantly, a loud explosion sounded from the human cage that was tens of meters high, and the entire corpse city trembled. In the human cage, blood mist swept, and the fierce spiral gunshot caused a deep pit and a big hole to be blasted out of the ground. Even the walls wrapped in blood scabs had blood holes, and the entire human cage was shattered. The undead owl king floated in the air with a blood gun in his hand, staring down. The blood mist dissipated, and a human figure stood in the center of the deep pit, holding a crystal clear crimson blood blade in his hand, unscathed. What? Even the undead owl king's eyes became shocked. The previous blow would kill even the lord level, but the human in front of him was unscathed. If the owl king only has this strength, it's really disappointing. Muqiu shook his head. After 1,000 years, the top strong men of the corpse clan have not made any progress, which made him a little disappointed. Looking for death. The undead owl king's eyes were sharp, and he had already started to kill. He held a blood-colored spear in his hand, and his body turned into blood mist and rushed towards Muqiu. www. Mewtwo remained calm and raised the magic sword horizontally in front of him. The blood-colored spear and the scarlet magic sword collided with each other, and the undead Owl King felt as if a mountain was blocking him, and he could not move forward at all. And then, an even more unimaginable scene happened. I saw that the scarlet magic sword was entangled with blood, and it was constantly absorbing the blood in his spear. Buzz. In just a few breaths, the spear in his hand had shrunk by half, and the spear body kept shaking, as if it was making a painful wail. How is it possible? The undead Owl King's pupils trembled, and his body retreated violently, looking at the magic sword in Mewtwo's hand with disbelief. The terrifying aura released from the demon sword actually made him, who always feeds on the blood of living beings, deeply afraid of it. It was like a peerless beast with life, greedily sucking every inch of blood around it. What exactly is that sword? Looking at the blood blade of the demon sword in Mewtwo's hand, the undead Owl King fell into deep thought. The dark purple box on Mewtwo's chest flashed with a strange luster, and the endless blood mist was absorbed in it. Suddenly, the undead Owl King recalled a legend that had been circulating among the Blood Clan for a long time. According to rumors, the ancestor of the Eternal Night Dynasty, the first generation of Demon Lord, once had a soul-devouring and bloodthirsty supreme demon weapon in his hand, which could swallow the netherworld blood sea and absorb the dead souls of hell. This demon weapon is extremely compatible with the abilities of the Blood Clan, and is regarded as a supreme treasure by the Blood Clan. Unfortunately, this demon weapon disappeared with the disappearance of the first generation of Demon Lord. For thousands of years, the successive Blood Clan leaders have been searching for the traces of this demon weapon, but none of them have been found. And that magic weapon has a very special ability. Not only does it have its own space inside, which can strengthen the items inside, but it also has a companion magic weapon, which is a demon sword that also has the ability to devour souls and blood. And the name of that magic weapon is one of the ancestral magic weapons, the Box of the Ghost. The undead Owl King's expression became extremely fanatical, and his voice trembled. He stared at the dark purple box on Mewtwo's chest with rapid breathing, and his expression was unprecedentedly excited. The first generation of demons, known as the ancestor of the Eternal Night, has 3 weapons. In addition to the imperial weapon representing the bloodline of the Eternal Night, there are 2 other powerful magic weapons that have disappeared from the world. And now, he actually encountered the Box of the Ghost that the Blood Clan has coveted for a long time. He must get it. The undead Owl King opened his hands, and the blood in his body was compressed to the extreme in an instant. His body also became shriveled and thin, and an extremely terrifying aura was released from his body. This energy fluctuation reached the peak of the destructive level, directly approaching the source of the Tao. Then, the blood in the whole human cage began to surge wildly, and the flesh and blood corpses on the ground were attracted by the invisible suction force and quickly shrank like withered flowers and plants. Even the blood in the bodies of those still alive flowed out uncontrollably, and countless humans and corpses were sucked into mummies. The blood in the sky all flowed into the body of the undead Owl King, and the latter's body began to grow rapidly in an instant. 3 meters, 5 meters, 10 meters. In just a few breaths, the undead Owl King's body grew to a height of more than 10 meters, and his body was even more huge, with bloodshot eyes. Crack crack. The blood mist raging in the space gradually cut deep cracks in the walls of the human cage. Boom. Accompanied by a loud bang, this giant building standing in the Corpse Clan's dark capital collapsed at this moment. The huge body of the undead Owl King covered the sky and the sun, shrouding the sky above the Nether City. A deep voice echoed in the sky above the Nether City. All corpses listen to my order, kill this human and seize the ancestral demon soldiers. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 569. As the human cage building tens of meters high collapsed, the resulting aftermath invaded the surrounding land for dozens of kilometers. Countless corpse tribesmen were stunned to see the scene, until the bloody shadow appeared on the sky, and a sickly low voice resounded through the sky. All zombie clans obey the order, kill all humans present, and seize the ancestral demon soldiers. In an instant, countless corpse tribes responded to the call of the undead Owl King, letting out frightening roars and running straight towards the direction of the collapsed human cage. Roar. There were only endless roars left in the world. Countless zombies surrounded the human cage like a wave, and powerful fluctuations of magic energy were endless and surging. On the ground, Yefanyan stared blankly at the masked figure not far in front of him, his pupils trembling. That mask, how is that possible? The back figure recalled in my mind overlapped with the figure in front of me, and the deep and indelible memory lingered in my heart. www. At this moment, she didn't even care about the surging corpses coming from the distance, her eyes were full of disbelief. It's been a long time since I've encountered this kind of battle. Miuchiu's eyes were filled with indifference, and she slowly turned her head and looked around. A large number of surrounding houses collapsed and destroyed in the aftermath of the collapse of the human cage. After hearing the news, countless zombie clans came with great momentum. The energy fluctuations gathered together seemed to turn into a huge bloody ghost, trying to tear apart all the creatures in front of it. In just a short moment, the zombie clan gathered here was already overwhelming. Thousands, tens of thousands, or tens of thousands. Roar. Following the roar of the undead Owl King, thousands of zombies stretched out their fangs and claws at this moment and attacked the masked figure in the center. But the masked figure surrounded by thousands of corpses showed no movement at all, and the corners of his mouth were slightly raised under the ferocious mask. This is much scarier than the battles at the end of the world. Miuchiu raised the crimson demon sword glowing with blood in her hand, and blood was flowing on the crystal clear sword. The next second, Miuchiu thrust the demon knife in his hand straight into the ground beneath his feet. As if the door to hell had been opened, the sky was covered with blood. In an instant, the ground under his feet was filled with blood, and countless blood emerged from the depths of the ground along the blade. It spread rapidly like ripples on the sea surface, and the entire land turned into a deep sea of blood in an instant. The thick smell of blood stimulated the senses of everyone present. The turbulent sea of blood spread to more than 10 kilometers with Miuchiu as the center, impacting the numerous zombie clansmen who came to attack and kill him. Whoosh! Immediately afterwards, pairs of deep red hands of deep blood suddenly stretched out from the sea of blood, entangled the corpses on the ground, and dragged them into the sea of blood at their feet. Blood souls with ferocious faces emerged from the sea of blood, flying in the air, screaming pitifully. In a moment, countless zombies were swallowed into the boundless sea of blood and turned into part of the dead ghosts. This kind of power is unmistakable, this is definitely Dash. The box of monsters. In the sky, the immortal Owl King, who was bathed in blood all over his body and transformed into a monster, became even more excited when he saw this scene, and he looked up to the sky and roared. He was going to get the supreme magic weapon that was regarded as a treasure by his vampire clan today. Miuchiu stood up straight, the demon sword in his hand surged with blood, and the area within several kilometers had turned into a sea of unparalleled ghosts. There was no more corpse clan figure to be seen. A huge shadow enveloped the top of his head, and Miuchiu slowly raised her head. Roar! I saw the undead king swooping in the direction of Miuchiu like a madman. The spear in his hand expanded several meters out of thin air under the nourishment of blood, and he roared. Die, die, the monster's box is mine. I don't know when my weapons became yours. Miuchiu pulled out the demon sword stuck on the ground, and the deep sea of blood everywhere was once again swallowed up by the blade, and she fought fiercely with the undead Owl King without hesitation. Die, die, die. The undead Owl King kept uttering morbid murmurs, brandishing his spear and stabbing out one after another, but Mewtwo easily blocked every blow. Suddenly, the immortal Owl King's attack missed the target, and the figure in front of him suddenly disappeared. "It's too slow." A magnetic voice came to his ears, and before the immortal king turned his head, a knife tip penetrated his chest. The sound of flesh and blood being cut was heard, and the expression of the immortal Owl King became even more crazy. "The sacred weapon passed through my body." His eyes turned to look behind him, but in the next moment, a deep pain suddenly came from his chest, and some kind of power in his body was flowing continuously. The blood thread surging on the blade that penetrated the body, blooming with a magnificent light, as if it were a greedy demon gnawing on some unparalleled delicacy. At this moment, he finally realized that it was his blood that was disappearing from his body. The blood escape method that was once invincible was useless at this moment. The demon knife gnawed not only his flesh and blood, but also his soul. The continuous flow of blood made his plump and huge body quickly become shriveled and thin, and in an instant he seemed to turn into a mummy. Instead, the demonic sword suddenly grew to a length of several meters out of thin air. The blade trembled, and the sound of the ghosts weeping came from within. "It's a pity, it seems that your flesh and blood are not to its taste, gourmet." A flash of blood flashed in Mewtwo's eyes, and he swung the magic sword. The crimson blade cut through the sky, and the withered body of the undead Owl King was cut off in an instant. This feeling. At the moment when his body was cut off by the magic sword, the undead Owl King saw the pupils under the mask. Somehow, at the moment of meeting this line of sight, his soul suddenly felt extremely trembling, and a palpitation that he had never felt before lingered in his heart. This feeling is the blood suppression of the upper corpse clan on the lower corpse clan. How is it possible? How could there be a corpse clan more noble than him in this world? You are. The pupils of the undead Owl King widened, and before he could finish speaking, the blood in his body had been devoured by the magic sword. As the last bit of his body function dissipated, the body of the undead Owl King also completely turned into a pile of flying ash and disappeared. At this point, a generation of Owl King fell. The blood cloud covering the sky gradually dissipated, and the faint light spread through the sky to the earth, reflecting the ruins of Udu City. The whole city became extremely quiet, and on a hill adjacent to Udu City, a figure in a red robe was staring at the scene in the distance. Suddenly, an arm stretched out from the sleeves and aimed the machine in his hand at the center of the battlefield. The masked black-robed man. Kaka-dash. Accompanied by a click, the red-robed figure gradually became dim and finally disappeared on the spot. In the center of Udu City, under the ruins of the cage, Mewtwo seemed to have a feeling and looked at the hills in the distance with a deep look. Turning around, the gradually clear sky sprinkled warm sunshine, and a line of sight behind him was looking at Mewtwo's figure in disbelief. Yafanyan sat limply in front of the ruins, looking at the masked black-robed figure in front of him, with a mixture of shock, suspicion, and a hint of panic that was difficult to conceal. The black-robed figure reached out and slowly took off the mask on his face. A gentle smile like a spring breeze appeared on his handsome face. "Long time no see, Miss Jianji." Yafanyan collapsed to the ground, his pupils suddenly shrank, and his expression became dazed. "It's really you." Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 570. Yafanyan looked at the extremely familiar face in front of her, her expression became dazed, and for some reason, 2 lines of tears flowed from the corners of her eyes. To this day, she still cannot connect this face with a gentle smile with the evil and rampant Lord of Eternal Night. "Why, it's been a long time since we last met, have you forgotten my old friend?" Mewtwo smiled slightly, as if the scene in front of him was really like the reunion of the old friend who had never seen each other. Predecessor, senior. Just then, a look of surprise came from behind. Miu turned around and saw a figure wearing a windbreaker and a fire mask standing in the ruins behind him. When this person took off the mask, he had short red hair and a heroic face. It was Hong Lian who had said goodbye to Miu not long ago. "Oh? It's you." Miu narrowed his eyes. If he remembered correctly, the purpose of Hong Lian and others was to return to the ancestral land. How could they appear in the capital of the Corpse Clan at this moment? Behind Hong Lian, figures wearing fire masks appeared one after another. These are the humans who participated in the raid on the human cage. In the previous battle, the human cage collapsed and they took the opportunity to escape with many prisoners. When they noticed something unusual in Yudu City, they planned to return to investigate and rescue Yefanyan. They were surprised to find that half of the city had turned into ruins, and even the corpse monsters in the city were nowhere to be found, and it seemed to have become an empty city. A middle-aged man took off his mask, hurriedly walked to Yefanyan, and asked with concern, "Son, are you okay?" When Miu heard the middle-aged man's address to Yefanyan, he thought of the whereabouts of Hong Lian and his group, and his eyes flashed. "Holy Son." After confirming that Yefanyan was fine, the man looked up at the human cage that had collapsed into ruins behind him, frowning and saying, "What happened here? Where did the undead Owl King go?" Miu smiled and said, "I think he is probably dead." Dead. As soon as these words came out, all the humans present changed their expressions, as if struck by lightning. That was a generation of Owl King, a noble existence that ruled a continent or even a clan. How could he die in the capital he led? Who has the ability to kill an Owl King? Everyone present couldn't believe it, but the scene in front of them clearly told them that a fierce battle that destroyed the world had just taken place here. Everyone looked at each other, and finally the middle-aged man said, "Leave here first. No matter what, this is always the territory of the Corpse Clan. It is too dangerous to stay here. It is better to leave here as soon as possible." Hong Lian looked at Miu. For some reason, she vaguely felt that the death of the Owl King must be related to the man in front of her. Miu noticed Hong Lian's gaze, turned around and nodded, smiling gently. Yeshenwei, covered with scars, was crushed under a huge rock, his body shriveled and his breath was weak. Not far away, a beast-eared girl was wrapped in a black flame barrier, her nose slightly frowned, sleeping soundly in it. The next day, a piece of news that shocked the entire Eternal Night dynasty spread to every corner of the 12 continents. One of the 12 Owl Kings of the contemporary era, the top powerhouse of the Corpse Clan, the so-called Undead Owl King, Yu Li, was killed in Yudu City. An Owl King-level powerhouse fell. In an instant, all forces were shocked by this shocking news, and they all tried to find out who was the one who could kill an Owl King-level powerhouse. What no one expected was that the one who killed the Owl King was actually a human. When they learned that the human who killed the undead Owl King was actually the blood demon who killed the Lord of the Northern Desert, the various ethnic groups finally paid attention to this powerful human being who suddenly appeared. In a magnificent palace-like building complex, the palace is decorated magnificently, with jade towers and golden pavilions, giving people a feeling of entering an ancient imperial palace. A woman in a palace skirt hurriedly walked in from the palace gate and walked into a hall at the end of the palace complex. The huge bedroom is exquisite, with tiles like colored glaze and sandalwood beams. There are also flying phoenixes carved on the inner pillars of the hall, which is extremely luxurious. In the deepest part of the bedroom, there is a bed, and a string of pearls and crystals form a crystal jade curtain, from which a delicate body can be vaguely seen. The woman dressed as a palace maid came to the bed and knelt down respectfully. "My queen, the undead Owl King of the Corpse Clan fell yesterday." The woman in the palace skirt actually had a pair of furry rabbit ears on her head. Oh, is that old guy dead too? With his ability, he could cause trouble for thousands of years. Who killed him? A lazy and charming voice came from the bed, which was so charming and captivating. Reporting to the queen, it is rumored that a human killed the undead Owl King. Human. The voice on the bed paused for a moment, and then said, I know, please leave. Through the hazy gauze curtain, the delicate body inside stretched lazily, seemingly not interested in such things. But the rabbit ears on the maid's head moved, and she hesitated and said, the human who was rumored to have killed the undead Owl King used the ancestral magic weapon used by the first generation of the Demon Lord. As soon as the words fell, a terrifying wave of magic energy suddenly came from the bed made of jade crystal core, and the crystals on the curtains began to burst as the pressure spread. The palace maid was so frightened that her body trembled and collapsed to the ground. Find that human for me. At any cost. The woman's voice was no longer as charming as before, but more decisive and tough.